Sorry, just finish other activity.
Ya, Bu. Amelia, mungkin bisa dimulai?
Oke, ma'am. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this public administration visiting lecture. My name is Amelia, and I will be the master of ceremony for this event. First, we would like to greet the Honorable the Vice Dean on behalf of the Dean of Faculty of Social and Political Science, Diponegoro University, the Head of Public Administration Department, the Head of Master Program of Public Administration, the Committee of the Visiting Lecturer, and the joyful ladies and gentlemen. First of all, let's pray our gratitude to the God Almighty for the grace and the guidance to us all, so that we may gather in this opening ceremony of the visiting lecture organized by Public Administration Department, bringing the theme Rethinking Collaboration and Partnership, a Public Policy Perspective. Pray, begin.
Thank you very much, Amelia.
Sorry, Doctor. So we would like to express our appreciation to all of the participants for your interest in our program. Hopefully this program brings knowledge and broadens our horizons regarding the relevant topics. Ladies and gentlemen, at the subsequent ceremony, we would like to invite you to listen to the national anthem of Indonesia Raya. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, the next ceremony would be the welcoming speech by the head of the Master Program of Public Administration, Dr. Augustine Rina Hirawati. Please, Dr. Augustine Rina Hirawati, time and screen is yours.
Okay, sorry. Thank you, Amel, and Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, Dr. Campbell.
Morning. Assalamualaikum.
Good morning. Waalaikumsalam.
May we always be happy and prosperous. We apologize that Mr. Dean Dr. Hadi Warsono MT was unable to attend this event. Thus, he sent us to open this event. Okay, and in international recognition would help Diponegoro University or Undip to achieve its goals as a world-class university by increasing its academic reputation. The academic reputation is measured by how far Undip known by foreign institutions through its teaching staff and researchers. International recognition can be realized by inviting foreign researchers from foreign university to partner up with Undip researchers. A reliable network will boost Undip's international reputation, which in the end would automatically include Undip as a world-class university. Research is one of the main elements of the three main activities besides teaching and innovation through community service, which use as a benchmark for making short-term and long-term strategies at Undip to improve its ranking in the international world. To support and long-term strategies at Undip improve international world, the visiting world-class lecturer program is one of the mainstay program to increase Undip's ranking. The visiting world-class lecturer program is a program that can be relied on to improve quality and quantity in various academic fields, especially research, teaching, and innovation. For this reason, the Master of Public Administration program, Faculty of Social and Political Science, Diponegoro University, organized this visiting lecturer with the theme Rethinking Collaboration and Partnership, a Public Policy Perspective. By saying Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, hereby I open this visiting lecturer even with Dr. Andian Campbell as the speaker. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Augustine Rina Hirawati, for the warmest welcome for all of the participants today. Ladies and gentlemen, to carry on the event, we will have our honorable speakers on hand. We will be listening to Dr. Adrian Campbell from International Development Department, the University of Birmingham. First, let me introduce the moderator, Dr. Hertuti Purnaweni from Diponegoro University. Please welcome the moderator, Dr. Hertuti Purnaweni. No time and screen is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Amelia Aisha, for introducing me and for letting me come into this session. It is a very good opportunity for us now to have Dr. Adrian Campbell as our guest lecturer this afternoon. And the topic will be on rethinking collaboration and partnership, a public policy perspective. This is a very interesting topic since public policy is very much the focus of the study of public administration. And in our department, there are courses on public policy and then on policy process and then individually on the courses of policy formulation, policy implementation, and also on policy evaluation. There is also course on public policy analysis. So in the Department of Public Administration at the Faculty of Social and Political Sciences of Universitas Diponegoro, where we are in now, we have been focusing on this public policy besides the public management. There were two focuses of the study of public administration, and which on public management and public policy. And in this afternoon, we are very lucky to have a guest lecturer, Dr. Adrian Campbell, a senior lecturer of the International Development Department at the University of Birmingham. Dr. Adrian, since most of our viewers, those who join these events, those who don't speak English very well, I hope that you don't mind that if you give your lecture slower, using not in your daily speed, but please try to make it slower so the audience will be getting a better understanding on what we are going to talk about. And this topic on the collaboration and partnership is again very interesting. It is said that the word collaboration is originally came into use in the 19th century as industrialization developed, as organization which are more complex emerge, and also the increasing division of labor and task. I'm sure that you are going to talk more about this. and hopefully that our audience will have a good understanding, increasing understanding on this particular concern on collaboration and partnership, which have been arising as a focus of study in both for-profit and academic partnerships. And I think that's my opening for this lecture, and we invite Dr. Campbell to give his lecture. Please, time is yours, Dr. Campbell.
Thank you very much, Professor Punawedi. Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
I'm delighted to have this opportunity to speak to you about this. What as the professor just said, one of the fundamental questions and problems of public administration and public management, and something which really you can find reflected in the whole history of modern organizations. Collaboration and partnership, our collaborative governance and partnership are often talked about, and I think the reason why they're talked about is that they go against the what you might call a simple bureaucratic view of public administration. They are what we have to do because a simple, straightforward approach doesn't work, because organizations and society are increasingly complicated, and collaboration and partnership are two of the means by which we can get things done, which would not be possible through what you might call a straightforward administrative or bureaucratic approach. Collaboration comes from the term Latin for to work together. So it's where you have different actors, different people who are choosing to work together. I think it's interesting to compare it to cooperation. Cooperation is a much colder term. Cooperation is something we cooperate. For example, we say we are cooperating with the police. It means we're answering their questions. Or cooperating. It means when you are given an instruction and then you may cooperate with that instruction. So it's something which is quite passive and doesn't imply any commitment. It's just you are answering the question. Collaboration is much more than that. Collaboration means you actually are working together. But the fact that it's collaboration means that you are coming from different positions. It's different organizations, different interests. Partnership is a related term. A partnership implies something a bit closer. It implies, like when we talk about a legal partnership, or so people who are working together, they formed a company, they've actually joined together as a company, and therefore they are working as one legal person. So a partnership is something closer. Collaboration is something that you might start and then finish. A partnership is usually something implies something a bit more permanent. But both of them have I think there's a human angle, there's a sense of commitment, which is not there in what you might call traditional public administration. This isn't the collaboration and partnership. This is not what Weber was talking about. Weber was talking about rules. He was talking about an impersonal system where you pursued you carried out your role, which is something separate from your personality. Collaboration and partnership is something a bit more human than that. I will now move to share my screen, which is here. I think this is. Yes, I hope everyone can see that.
Yes, we already see that. Yes, thank you very much.
Good. Okay, right. So, I think the title is quite the title: Rethinking Collaboration and Partnership. I think yes, rethinking or reviewing. And what I want in this talk to do is to review why do we talk about collaboration and partnership? Where do they fit in the evolution of public policy and public administration? And I've also looked at a number of cases which I've been involved in over the years of my career, which were related to this aspect of collaboration and partnership. So what I want to convey to you is that collaboration and partnership are part of the solution to what you might call the problem of public administration. Public administration, we expect it to work perfectly. Of course, it doesn't always work perfectly. And collaboration and partnership are one of the instruments, or two of the instruments, which we apply to try to improve the way that public administration works. So my first slide, this is the, you probably know this picture or similar one. This is, of course, the Tower of Babel. And there are many pictures of this, but this is my favorite one. As you know, this is a story in it's in the Bible. I think it is in the Quran. It comes out. It's the Tower of Haman. It's the tower that was supposed to go to reach heaven. It's a very ambitious project. It goes up, and then as the tower is built, then the workers, the builders, all find that they're speaking different languages. They don't understand each other, and then the tower cannot be finished. It becomes a kind of disaster. And I find this story is very interesting and very instructive. That it's extraordinary that a story that comes, I think, from Babylon in the 3,000 or 4,000 years ago, it captures something about the problem of organizations. And I think this, yes, I think firstly I'd say, what's the lesson of this story for organization and public policy? And I think there are two lessons. The two lessons and a question. One is that what it tells you is any large undertaking will lead to differentiation. Differentiation, specialization, and ultimately fragmentation. The professor mentioned earlier that this collaboration, it goes back to the 19th century. Indeed, the 19th century is really was the beginning of the age of the large organization, when you began to get increasing division of labor, increasingly large organizations in the private sector, in the public sector. Differentiation, by differentiation, we mean that there are more and more departmental divisions, there are more and more levels, there are more and more different skills, different groups, different specialisms, different professions, and so on. So organizations begin to become larger, and in the end, they begin to fragment, because if you have differentiation, it becomes difficult to integrate. And this is I always tell my students, this is the fundamental problem of organization, that as technology and society become more complex, you have increasing differentiation, which is good, because we have the tasks we expect organizations to do are more complicated. Their expectations are more demanding, but this means there has to be a greater and greater effort for integration. Otherwise, an organization will just fragment. It will just fall apart. And this is I think this is one of the lessons of the Tower of Babel. That's why this old story, this story still has a meaning for us when we look at organizations. And I think the second lesson from it is that, well, either you should avoid large undertakings. Some people don't like large organizations. Some people would prefer everything to be done by small units, or small businesses, or small cooperatives, or communities, and to avoid large organizations altogether. I'm old enough to remember a classic from 1970s. There was a famous book called Small is Beautiful by Schumacher. Okay. And which is not mentioned much nowadays, but actually was very ahead of its time. A lot of environmental or green thinking is can be derived from the work of Schumacher. And it's interesting what Schumacher's job was. He was actually the economist for the National Coal Board in the UK, which was at that time, it doesn't exist now, but at that time it was I think the largest employer, certainly in the UK, possibly in Europe. It had nearly 1 million employees. It was a very, very large, a very differentiated, very quite bureaucratic, big public organization. And I think that Schumacher's experience of working in that made him believe that small was better than large, because he'd worked in a large organization all of his life. So yes, some people would say, they see the Tower of Babel and say, yes, this means you should avoid large undertakings, avoid large organizations, or this would be a slightly different lesson, or make sure the people engaged in the large organization can find a common language. And we still use this term, like in that story, that we need to have a common language. If you look in the literature on collaboration, partnership, public administration, you will often find references to the need for people to speak each other's language, not literally language, but to find some way of communicating. Because one of the things that I think is true in all organizations is that people see the organization and its goals differently depending on where they are in the structure. If you are in the finance department, you tend to see the organization and its goals through finance. If you are in the engineering or technical part, you tend to see the organization in technical or engineering terms. So wherever you are in the organization, you see things slightly differently and you have a different language. I can give you an example of this, not far from where we are in Birmingham, in Warwickshire, in Coventry. They set up a partnership in a particular area where there was a problem of crime, young people committing crime, and they decided to set up a partnership, and they brought together all of the institutions who had a connection with this problem. So they brought together the police, they brought together the probation service, the people who check on or talk to people who are offenders. They brought in the social services. They brought the housing department for people who represented the buildings these people lived in. They brought in the schools. So they had all of these different professional groups coming together and say, look, we all have a connection with this problem. We all know these young people. I think the number of young people offending was probably about 30. It was a relatively small number, but the different parts of the public service couldn't deal with them effectively. So they brought them together and they said, in this area, we will collaborate as partners. We will collaborate. We will work together to try to solve this problem. And the interesting thing, I mean, eventually the project was actually very successful, but it took a lot of time, because when you have social workers, police, teachers, housing officers, health workers, all in a room, they don't agree about anything. They don't even use the same terminology. The police wanted to refer to the young people as offenders, criminals. The social services said, no, these are our clients. These are the people we work for. The school saw them as pupils. The health service saw them as patients. So even the basic terms they couldn't agree on. It took them, I think it was about 6 weeks of regular meetings before they could actually agree what they were talking about and how they would work together. So this point about language is important. Different professions, different departments speak a different language. They have a different understanding of what their job they're doing is and who they're doing it for and why they're doing it. So coming back to this idea, the Tower of Babel, yes, if you're going to build something, if you're going to have large organizations and the public service, you have to have people in them who can find a common language with each other. Otherwise, the system becomes unworkable. I think, and I would really emphasize that example. The number of people the number of people that were a problem in this case, these young offenders, was relatively small, and a much larger number of public servants were trying to deal with it, but couldn't because of the difficulties of collaboration. Only when they really put a lot of effort into understanding each other could they actually then make a difference on this problem. So yes, if you're going to, where you have the state, large organizations, there has to be a common language. People have to be able to find a common language and understand that. So that, I think those are the lessons that come out of that story. I'll be coming back to that story in a different way later. But finally, I think there's an ambiguity. So, was the tower a mistake? Was it a mistake to build large organizations? Is this something we should avoid? Should we try and make things small, like Schumacher was saying? Or is it just the way it was built? If we can build it better, if we can have different principles of organization, would the tower be, can we build a large organization, a state that works well? And I think there's an ambiguity about this. I'm sure you probably have covered this. There are different fundamental principles of organization, whether you're talking about the state, public administration, or whether you're talking about the private sector. There are different principles of organization. You can either, if you want something to happen, if you want something to be done, you can either do it through a hierarchy by saying that you have different levels of authority, and a person at a higher level of authority can instruct a person at a lower level to do something. Or you have a market, which means that you are going to pay the person, you're going to have a contract, an agreement, a certain amount of resources or money will be spent to do something. Or you have networks, which means you won't really have rules. You will have people cooperating, collaborating, they're exchanging favors in a sense, and adapting as deciding how to work together as they actually work together, not deciding it in advance. I think that's an important point about networks. A hierarchy is fixed in advance. You decide who's more important than who has more power than who. Markets are fairly fixed because there are prices to be paid for different services. Network is much more vague. And its networks have become very fashionable. The last 20, 30 years, networks have become very popular in the private sector and in the public sector. And when we talk about collaboration and partnership, often what is implied is a kind of network organization where people come together because they have something, they have some problem that they are concerned with. They think they can share this problem and work together, and they're not quite sure how they're going to do that. So they come together as a network. They contact each other. They meet, and that story I was telling you earlier about Coventry, this crime partnership, that was very typical from the 1990s onwards. We had the new public management, which I'm sure you know about, the 1980s, 1990s, and right up to the present day in some ways, where you shift from the hierarchy to the market. You're trying to use market mechanisms rather than hierarchical mechanisms to get work done. And then you have a reaction against that from the late 90s, early 2000s onwards, where it's more about moving from hierarchy to networks. And that was the period of new public governance. That was the period of partnership. That's when partnerships really became a very widespread term. And I remember particularly in this country, in the early to mid 2000s, up until the financial crisis of 2008, there were partnerships were everywhere. Everything had a partnership. Whatever the problem was, you brought different public authorities, different non-state actors, NGOs, citizens, representatives, stakeholders. You brought them together, and you would have a partnership to deal with a particular problem. So you'd have partnerships for economic development. You have partnerships for partnerships for about unemployment or poverty. You have partnerships about empowering citizens. You have partnerships about crime, about homelessness. Whatever the problem was, you would have a partnership. You bring together different, and this was the period also when we had this term, it was called cross-cutting issues. And the idea of cross-cutting issues, and a cross-cutting issue is something which affects a lot of different public agencies. So, for example, an aging population, something which we now have. An aging population is a cross-cutting issue. It's not just the social service ministry. It's not just the finance ministry. It's not just education or health. All of these ministries and many other public and private bodies are concerned by this. So this is a cross-cutting issue. It's something which you can't deal with just through one single agency. So some public services can be dealt with fully within the scope of one ministry or one agency. But there are others that saw bigger issues, and demographics, aging population, regional differences in economic development. These are much more complex. They are cross-cutting issues which require collaboration between different parts of the state. So I think that really was something which I think, because when we had new public management first, we tried to put everything into kind of contracts and focus, the task and say how much we're going to pay for this and who's going to do it and so on. And I think then it was discovered really that some issues can be dealt with like that, but many other problems need to have a broader approach. They need to have partnership. They need to involve lots of different agencies. And you don't always know in advance with partnership who is going to do more work than who. If you have a partnership about aging population or older people, you need several ministries to be involved. You need local governments to be involved. You don't know in advance how much each of those partners is going to contribute. You just know that they're needed, but it's not something you can decide in advance. So this very much, partnership is like, it's a network type of organization. It's where you decide as you go what is needed, who needs to do what, and you discuss it at each stage. And this was very popular. I mean, I think I'm looking back to that period. Most middle-ranking public officials would be active in different partnerships. They would spend their week going to different partnership meetings. They would know people from other ministries, from other local authorities, from other public agencies, because they would be meeting them in partnership meetings. Now, if I asked you, what's the problem with that? Would anyone have an idea? What would be the problem with that approach? Anyone? I think the problem with the partnership approach is that if you apply it to everything, you're taking up a lot of time, taking up a lot of people's time, because partnerships are relationships. Relationships need to be worked on. You need to put time into developing relationships, and that's very valuable when it's necessary. If you're doing everything like that, you begin to it can become quite time-consuming. What's the opposite of that? I would say is like a more traditional bureaucratic approach. Like if you go to the ministry, I'm thinking then, for example, the ministry, the Foreign Office, for example, they would have a desk for a particular country, and you'd be dealing with the person who's on that desk, and then they would be moved somewhere else, and someone else would come to that desk, and you basically carry on where you were before. There was no relationship building. Is not in a traditional bureaucracy. You don't need to worry about relationship building. You have a role. People move on. The new person comes in the role, and you just carry on. Now, in some ways, that approach is very, very cost effective, because you don't need. You know what the role is. If you know some of the old, if the Charles Handy, the four cultures, the role culture was where bureaucracy. It means you have a role, people step into the role, then they move to another role, someone steps into that role, and the machinery of administration continues. And it's quite cost effective. When you have an organization built on relationships, it can be much better where that's needed. But if you're doing it for everything, it becomes quite time consuming. And what happened was we then had the 2008, we had the financial crisis around the world, and we had a very big cuts in public spending. I think in the UK, about a third of the civil servants were made redundant. One third of the civil service was cut, lost their jobs. Many people were cut from local governments. So there wasn't the time, there weren't the people available to run a partnership model in the same way as before. So I think so when I think of partnership, I will look back to that period just before the financial crisis, when we had bigger public services and they were doing everything through partnerships. After that, we still have partnerships. Partnership is still important, but you have to be slightly more careful where you put your resources. So I think why I'm saying this is that everyone likes partnership as a kind of alternative to bureaucracy. But I think we also have to remember bureaucracy still has its uses. Some things are done cost effectively through a bureaucracy, and that we should use partnership where it's needed. We don't need to use it for everything. It doesn't replace it doesn't replace bureaucracy. So I would say that you need to have bureaucracy and you need to have partnership, and the two you should use them where it's effective to do so. And on this point about bureaucracy, the bureaucracy is it's curious because everyone's against, it's always been a negative term. It tends to, where the term actually comes from, it comes from, I think France was probably, the origins, I mean, China was probably the first country to have a full-scale bureaucracy in the imperial China. But in modern terminology, it was probably the French monarchy, the absolute monarchy, that's where the term bureaucracy came from. They had a lot of powerful officials. But that isn't really where what we call modern bureaucracy really comes from. The bureaucracy that Weber wrote about is more recent. It's primarily in the USA. Weber, we often, when Weber wrote about bureaucracy, it's often said that, yes, he was talking about the German bureaucracy of his time. That's partly true, but a lot of his praise of bureaucracy actually comes from his trip to the United States, where he saw bureaucracy in the public and private sector. He basically saw the big corporations, which were appearing then in the late 19th, early 20th century. He saw this was the modern bureaucracy, where you have division of labor, you have very set ways of doing things. You have systems, you have rules for everything. You have clear lines of promotion, and this is the modern bureaucracy. And the U.S. corporation, whether public or private, that was the classic form of the bureaucracy. It probably reached its peak of popularity probably around 1940, Second World War. That was really the height of the, and I think the curious thing is that is the time when public policy and organization theory and management, they both appeared in their modern form around that time, with origins in a number of countries, but I suppose, the big development of the subjects tended to come from the US, and they came out in the form of a criticism of bureaucracy. If you look at the founding, the most influential, many of the most influential writers on management and on public policy from that time, Chester Barnard, Merton, Selznick, Herbert Simon, and so on, they were all criticizing different aspects. They're basically saying how the limitations of bureaucracy, how bureaucracy doesn't work. So it's curious that you have the United States, which was the home to perhaps the highest, at that stage, the highest development of the bureaucratic model. They were criticizing and saying how it doesn't work. I mean, the key point, what Simon showed, that decisions are not always rational, that their decisions are presented as rational, but often they aren't. If you are, those of you who are in the financial field or budgeting, I think the beginning of Herbert Simon's career, he went to a budgetary meeting. I think it was in Washington, or certainly one of the states, and he thought they were going to discuss how to put a budget together through a systematic analysis. And what he found was a very political discussion, which people were just basically arguing on the basis of what they had the previous year and how much it should be increased. And he saw that this was not really rational. So the decision making was not as rational as it appeared, and yet the bureaucracies, the government bureaucracies, the big private corporations, they presented themselves as being very rational and very reliable and rule-based, but actually they weren't. Selznick did perhaps one of the first main modern studies of public policy, and what he found, he looked at the big public works programs of the 1930s, and he found that he was quite shocked to find many of the people involved, the civil servants, the officials and so on involved, didn't really share the goals of what they were doing. They were actually pursuing their own departmental goals or their own agency goals. That he found, people were not, the goal of the organization, the purpose that they had of the work was not actually what the people were trying to achieve. They had their own interests. And that's something I've heard many times since. I remember one MBA student who, very high scoring, very high grade MBA student. Yeah, when he went to work in a large corporation, and he said he almost had all these ideas about how to do strategy and so on, but after 2 weeks, he said he almost had a mental breakdown because he found that people were not actually the goals of the organization were not the goals that people were working for. People were working for their own concern, their own departments, their own profession or whatever. And he found this, and this is so right from the beginning in organizational studies and in public policy, you have this problem that not everyone shares the goals of the organization, or not everyone has the same understanding of what the goals of the organization are. Now, that doesn't mean, I think I'm saying all that, that doesn't mean that bureaucracy doesn't work or that it's bad, that it needs to be replaced, but it means that there are certain dangers within it, that one cannot assume that it will work well, that we like to imagine, I think the way I would put it to my students is we like to imagine our organization as like one brain, like one person. But of course, an organization is not one brain. An organization is hundreds, maybe thousands of brains, not all of which agree about what they're doing and why they're doing it. And you have to understand that nature. We think of an organization as one, but it can act as one, but it takes a lot of effort to make it do so. At the beginning, people thought that corporations and ministries will work like machines, like a reliable machine. Sometimes they do, often they don't. So you have this, I put it here, the flight from bureaucracy. Right from the 1940s, you had theorists of public administration were arguing against, they were talking about the failings of bureaucracy, the failings of the large organization. There's actually an interesting point here. There was Graeber, who died recently, an anthropologist. He was based in LSE. He was American, based in LSE. Very critical, but I don't agree with all that he says about bureaucracy. I think he's I think he's excessively critical, but he does point out an interesting point. He said that, in fact, in liberalism, our states are all liberal in one way or another. Liberalism sees itself as for freedom and the market rather than state control. And yet, it is the liberal state, whether it's the USA or Europe or many other countries, it's the liberal state which actually has the most elaborate, the most extensive bureaucracy. When there was the transition from communism in the Soviet Union, or after the Soviet Union, I was involved for many years in projects to do with the transition from communism to post-communism. And one of the curious things about it was that the bureaucracies in the Soviet Union were not as big as the ones we had in the UK or the US. They had very inefficient factories. They had a lot of people doing working in a very inefficiently, but the actual bureaucracy, the actual administrative structures were relatively small compared to ours. They would have a city education department would have 5 or 10 people in it, not 500 as we would have. So the liberal states, because of rights, because of laws, because of the need to prevent corruption or prevent various types of inequality, has much more elaborate bureaucracies than any other system. Now, I personally find that Graeber sees that as a criticism of the liberal state. I think what it tells us is that bureaucracy is potentially good. It has its good side, but we need to you need to be aware of its negative aspects as well. So what we have in our state systems, we have a sort of bureaucratic system, but our belief is in anti-bureaucracy. And this is why I think a lot of the public administration theory that you see can be confusing, because we live and work in a bureaucratic system, but we always talk against bureaucracy as if there were an alternative to bureaucracy, rather than just how to improve it. If you look in the literature on organizations and in public administration, there's always attempts to try and say, no more bureaucracy. We can put bureaucracy aside and have something else. So their drive to reduce bureaucracy. But of course, as you know, this happens with anti-corruption drives as well. When you try to reduce bureaucracy, what usually happens is you create another bureaucracy, which is there to try and reduce. It creates another avenue for bureaucracy. So I think you have the inevitability of bureaucracy. When I say bureaucracy, I mean a large organization based on rules and based on formal procedures. I think that is inevitable. I think you have that whenever you're doing if there's a large amount of work to do, you are going to have a bureaucracy in some form. But we're always trying to reduce it and eliminate it. There's a lot of literature on this now. Just clarify what I mean by bureaucracy. Bureaucracy, I think, is where you could say bureaucracy means an emphasis on formal procedures, an emphasis on due process. When you do something because it has to be seen to be done, you have to, not just because it's worth doing, but it has to be seen to be done, due process. So compliance, where you comply or you obey central rules from headquarters. So you have a system of instructions which come from high up in the organization, and you have a system of compliance of people checking to see that these instructions have been carried out. You have you have impersonality, I would say defensive impersonality, where the bureaucracy takes decisions not really taking into account personal aspects or the human side, but just it said, no, we are implementing the rules. So the bureaucrat is separated from the effects of their decisions. And you have standardization, means you try to do things in the same way. Consistency, When you're in a large organization are always frightened of being inconsistent. They always want to do, they have to show that they handled each person's case in the same way. You get sectional interests in bureaucracy. It means that in a large bureaucracy, you tend to have strong departments, you tend to have sections, people pursuing the interest of their particular department or profession. And I think the most important, it's an old phrase now, it goes back to Merton in the 1940s, but I think the most important problem of bureaucracy is what is called goal displacement. And goal displacement means that you have the purpose, but once you put it into the bureaucracy, the purpose is no longer the means is the purpose. So, for example, and you see this with performance management. So, if you say the purpose is to reduce crime, and then you say, well, what does that mean? You say, well, okay, we're going to reduce crime by increasing the number of arrests. Now, once you have done that, arresting people becomes the goal, not the reducing crime, because and whatever bureaucracies do, they tend to do goal displacement. They tend to, you have the goal, but the means of achieving that goal becomes the goal because you're measured on that. See, you're just doing your part of it. If you want to, in a classic bureaucracy, people are just concerned with their particular part of the work. They're not interested in the wider goal. They're just what is it that they have been given to do? That's what they focus on. That's what they are judged on by their superiors, and they don't take a wider interest in what they're achieving. So in a sense, that goal displacement, I would say, is the negative side of the division of labor. Division of labor is a positive thing. It's something which increases productivity and efficiency, but it also has the downside that it leads to goal displacement. People just focus on their particular part. So then you have the kind of the anti-bureaucracy movements. This goes right back to, if you go back, the organic and mechanism, this is from the 1960s. There was a very interesting study by Burns and Stalker where they showed two different types of organization. One which was run as a kind of routine, on a kind of routine basis, like a machine, sort of mechanistic organization, and another one which is organic, more like a living organization, which is based on commitment. And I think this became kind of the ideal of kind of post-bureaucratic organization. It would be like a living organization, that it would be focused on the task, not on procedures. And you can find that a high commitment organization is very much the organic, what we call the organic style. So the anti-bureaucracy goes back to the 40s, 50s, 60s. In more recent years, you have the agile organization, which comes out of project management. The idea that agile means that you basically work through relationships rather than rules, which sounds a bit dangerous actually, but it's the idea is that in an agile organization is one where people they have their skills, they know each other's skills, and they adapt to each situation as required. They don't just follow a particular manual. So an agile organization is one. If I think of the large US type multinational organizations, in the past they would have a manual with every possible, giving the answer how you're supposed to deal with every possible situation. An agile organization is different from that. An agile organization basically means you have to know your people you're working with, and you adapt to the circumstances, and you adapt to their skills, and so on. So it's agile. You're adapting. Yes, it's a kind of it's where you have a much. You look at the situation, you look at the people involved, and you adapt to that. Holacracy is another. It's applied in some public organizations. Holacracy is a kind of anti-hierarchical form of organization where people basically have tasks and they relate to each other through tasks which help each other rather than being hierarchical. I have to say that I've spoken to people who work in holacracy organizations. It isn't that different from a hierarchy, because I think one of the one of the problems of this kind of anti-bureaucracy movement is that they tend to assume that hierarchy is a very top-down organization, whereas the reality is that a hierarchy is a division of labor by different levels. And a hierarchical organization doesn't necessarily mean you are always given orders from the top down. You could have a hierarchical organization that's where everyone did the job at their level and respected each other's authority. That can also be a hierarchical organization. So I think what they call holacracy just means a hierarchy in which people respect each other's the area of each other's competence, so they don't undermine the people who are below them in the hierarchy. And then there's perhaps a more interesting one. Very recently, this Gary Hamel and Zanini on humanocracy, and this it's an interesting book to read, because this really is very strongly against bureaucracy. And I think the main argument they're making is that bureaucracy was needed in the past. They put management and bureaucracy together. They say that basically managers are bureaucrats. People who are administering, this is bureaucracy, where you have the task being done, whether it's medicine or building or whatever, and then you have management and administration over that. And what they're saying, in fact, is that in many areas of work, you don't need managers so much, because people can administer themselves much more, particularly with technology, with advances in education. You don't need large management structures anymore. This is the argument they're making. I'm a little skeptical. I think it's an interesting argument. I'm a bit skeptical about this, because I don't think it's just about ability. Yes, people can administer themselves, but that doesn't mean that they will. The function of management is not just to organize. It's not a straightforward one. There are many functions that managers carry out. So I think they're taking a rather, when you read their book, I think it's very easy to agree with it, because we've all seen bureaucracies working in a kind of frustrating way that prevents work being done. But I think that doesn't mean that the fact that it's done badly doesn't mean it shouldn't be done at all. I think they're going to the other extreme. They're saying that more and more work should be self-managed, and that management and administration are unnecessary. Administration should just be an extension of whatever other skill they're making. And you can see in some areas it is like that. In some areas to do with very technical programming and coding and this kind of area. Yes, you don't need elaborate management structure. You basically have professionals who are collaborating with each other. You don't need a structure over that. It's it used to be called coordination by mutual adjustment. It means that professionals, they work with each other. They find out, they help each other, and they don't necessarily need management to coordinate them. So I think it's this anti-bureaucracy movement amongst consultants and commentators and so on. It's partly a reaction to the fact that as technology changes, the large traditional organization may not seem necessary as it was in the past. People are more educated, people are more professional, and it is actually easier for them just to collaborate with each other than to go through management. So there is some truth in that, and they are reflecting an underlying trend. I just wanted to go back in time for another aspect of this issue about bureaucracy and collaboration, and to go to the what's called the implementation pessimism literature. And there's a very interesting literature of particularly the 1970s, 80s, Pressman and Wildavsky, Bardak and others. And it's quite odd if you read it particularly if you read it, in an international context, because these people are all writing about the USA, and they're basically saying policy can't be implemented in the USA. It's impossible to get anything done. And this is strange, because we've been brought up to think in the USA things work well. In other countries, there can be problems, but in the USA, government and administration work very effectively. And then you discover actually it wasn't like that. And what they're basically saying is that, I think particularly with the US federal system, but we have public bureaucracies. There are so many people involved in implementation, so many levels, so many what they call veto points, so many points at which somebody can say, no, you can't do that. Any policy implementation, it gets slow and becomes very, very difficult to actually carry out. And so in a sense, what that's, the implementation pessimism, it got to the point where I think by the early 1980s, there was a view that government doesn't work, that it's almost impossible to do anything through government, even in the USA where there are large resources and so on. And then, of course, you began to get there was some reaction against that, saying that you can get things implemented, just have to you have to work a bit harder to do that. There are two responses. One is to work harder on relationships, like as in the idea of collaboration and partnership. For example, a very interesting article recently, just recently, before he became President Biden, they were saying that Joe Biden in his career was actually very effective in getting things implemented, because he would find out who was who in the administration. Although he's up in the political level, he would always go through the offices and find out who actually does what job. So if he wanted something done, he knew who to go to get it done. So he found a way through. So I think that's a more general point there, which is that, yes, the bureaucracy, if you just approach them in a simple technical way, they often don't work. If you find out who is who, if you build relationships, like anywhere else, then you can get things done through the bureaucracy. And I think if you look at people in public bureaucracies, you will find that there are some who can get things done because they find the way to, and there are others who expect it to be easy, and when it isn't easy, they just give up. They say, well, it's the bureaucracy, I can't deal with it. So yeah, that's one view. The other view, another response to it is to try to remove some of those people. So you get ideas like business process re-engineering, which has often been applied in the public sector also, which basically is about how to cut down the number of stages, how to reduce the number of steps in any processing. In whatever process you're talking about, whether it's approving investment decisions or paying expense claims, find out what are the different stages and try to reduce the number of people involved, reduce the number of veto points. I think there was a view in the implementation literature, the more stages in the process, the longer it was going to take. The more people who could stop something happening or slow it down, the more difficult it would be to get anything done. And this meant, I think, what goes with business process engineering as well, and this is often also applied in the public sector, strengthening the front office rather than the back office functions. So the idea of the back office means all of the administrative, regulatory structures and so on, to try and reduce that, to make it less stages in the process, and put more emphasis on frontline services. So more of the resources reaches the front line where they actually engage with the customer or the citizen, whatever. So that's the kind of reaction against that. So you have a reaction against the kind of internal administrative structures. There's an interesting, one author that you don't see quoted so much now, but it has a very interesting view, is Dunsire, who was one of the few, outside the US, one of the few scholars who focused particularly on implementation. And he eventually came to this idea of what he called calibration. And you can find this still quoted in some places. It's the idea that I think what he started from was the view that it's difficult to get people to see the organization the same way. Remember, I said at the beginning, people working in a bureaucracy or in a large organization, they will see things differently depending on where they are. You can't, it's very difficult to get everyone agreeing the same view. However, what he's saying is they don't need to all agree. They don't need to have kind of pure harmony. What you want is a system where people's conflicting interests will have a good effect. He said it's a bit like the balance of power in international relations. He said that in the system of government, you want to have checks and balances so that people are encouraged to try harder. For example, a simple example of what he said, he would say you have a league table, show who is doing better than who, which districts are performing better than which ones, which schools are getting better results. And so you push people into competition with each other, and that actually leads to improvements. So I find it's a useful idea, because I think he's saying that it's very difficult to get everyone agreeing about everything. It's difficult to ensure that everybody has the same goals, but you can set up systems in which people the efforts people make will achieve those goals, even if it's not what they're actually thinking about. They may be pursuing their own interests, but the result may be good for the organization and the country overall. I think it's the idea, it's linked closely with self-government. It's linked with the idea of self-managing systems. There's an idea around the time he wrote this in the 1990s. There was a lot of interest in what they called autopoiesis, which meant systems which somehow regulate themselves in nature or in systems. And I put it not reliant on what some people have called the harmony fallacy. The harmony fallacy, you don't need to agree that it's a fallacy, but the idea would be that you can get a kind of collective goal can be achieved even without everyone necessarily agreeing with it. I think you can have two different views on that. Clearly, leadership, one of the tasks of leadership is to see that people can share values, share goals and so on. But you can't always achieve that. So the harmony fallacy is the idea that nothing will happen unless everyone agrees. And I think what Dunsire is trying to show is that you can actually achieve things even if you can play on people's interests, and that can actually have a good effect. I think it's actually, in a sense, it's an application of a kind of market logic. It's a bit like, when Adam Smith says that, we get bread not because the baker is a nice person, but the baker, to make a living, the baker makes bread, and this gives us bread. It's so organizations can also be like that. That it's not about everyone agreeing and sharing values. It can also be about people's self-interest. So you can use that. Right, vertical differentiation and horizontal integration. I think this is a major part of the background for collaboration and partnership. The vertical and horizontal. A lot of in public administration, people talk a lot about silos. I don't know if you use this term. It's a kind of slang. Silos are where you keep grain, as towers, which are tall towers which aren't connected. And very widely, people they use this term. They say, in our organization, it's all vertical silos. It means that you have functional departments which basically run their own, they stay in their own structure, and they don't collaborate with other departments, with other functions. And the contrast would be horizontal networks. So some people, there's a contrast. People say you can either have functional vertical silos or you can have horizontal networks. You can, to some extent, you can have both of those if you have teams working across the organization. team. This came in very much in the 1980s, I think, 1980s, 90s. You began to get the idea of the team approach. The idea is take people from different parts of the organization and bring them together as a team. Sometimes referred to as a task force. You see that task force, to solve a problem, take people from different departments and put them together. I think there was also a kind of a Japanese influence on this. The Japanese did this, quality circles, take people from different parts of the organization and make them work together as a group without, not in a hierarchical way. You also get it through matrix organization, where you have you report to a department, but you also report to projects and programs. So you are reporting in two directions. So you've got the horizontal side and you also have the vertical side. So I think there's an understanding that you need vertical and horizontal. It's just finding the right instrument, the right balance between them. Another way of doing it is through a corporate culture, a career development. So in many governmental systems, you move people around between ministries so that you pull the government together by the fact that you have networks of people across different ministries, particularly in Indonesia, certainly in a large country like India. This is one of the key methods of keeping the country together, is that you have an elite group of civil servants who are, they go to regions, they go to the states, and they also go from one ministry to another. So what unites them is the fact they know each other and they all serve the central state, but they do it in different parts, they go through different parts. So that's another means of overcoming this problem of vertical differentiation and horizontal integration. One of the problems of this, of course, is that there's a trade-off between accountability and goal effectiveness. For example, if you have a team approach, one of the reasons why there's a whole literature appeared on, so teams don't work, because a team can't be held accountable. In the end, an individual has to be held accountable, or it's very hard. If you have a team of people and something goes wrong, they will all blame. Well, it becomes difficult to work out who is accountable, who actually is responsible. Now, a vertical structure is very good at focusing accountability. Not always, it doesn't always work perfectly there, but it is, with a team there can be a problem with that. On the other hand, a team working towards a goal, teams that can be focused on achieving goals better than traditional departments, because traditional departments, in the end, they're focused on their own survival and on their own procedures, and the goal can be lost in that. Whereas a team, if you set up a team to achieve something like a task force, they're more likely to remain focused on that broader goal. And then of course you have the trade-off between specialization and coordination. The more specialization you have, the more difficult it is to coordinate. If you focus too much on coordination, you lose the depth of specialization. So really, you have to find. So I think what I'm saying, how this all fits together with the theme, is to say that collaboration and partnership are a response. They are something there to balance traditional bureaucratic administration, but they don't replace it. They are part of a balance. You try to get the best of both the traditional administration and collaboration and partnership. They're a balance. It's not one or the other. They need to work together. Horizontalism. I just, in passing, that in the last about 10 years ago, there was a big I expect in the literature, a lot of people in the literature also had the idea that somehow with technology, particularly the internet and Twitter and things like that, power would become very dispersed. Everything would become, organizations would all become very flat. Every citizen would be empowered. And there was even a very popular selling book by Moses Naim in 2004 saying, yeah, the end of power, he called it the end of power. Power differences would be flattened by technology. I mean, he was right up to a point. He was right in saying that the dominance of large organizations, the world that Weber saw when he went to the US, to some extent that is no longer the case. But I would say if you look around, you still see some very large organizations which are very powerful. I don't think the flattening has really happened. But I think the idea that the traditional large organization has been challenged, that organizations, yes, you see a lot of work on Generation Z, for example, people saying that the current generation, the generation that's grown up with the iPhone, are less hierarchical. They're less likely to enjoy work or less to be satisfied working in traditional organizations. So there is some truth in that, but I think it was rather exaggerated. This book by Nunes about horizontalism, I think what happened, a lot of people, this horizontalism found its way into many popular movements at the beginning of the decade, 2011-12. And I think it's interesting, he said what happened was they showed an inability to change tactics, they showed a lack of clear strategy, and an inability to scale up, to get larger without falling apart. They couldn't coordinate. So when it's taken to the extreme, the kind of non-hierarchical organization has difficulty functioning. It's horizontal. If you take horizontalism to the extreme, it doesn't work. So pure verticalism doesn't work. Also, pure horizontalism also doesn't work. Right. I'm just going to go. There are several examples that I wanted to give just to show the different ways in which these ideas are important. I had a number of projects in Ukraine, in the Lviv region, and it was just a very clear-cut example of this idea of horizontal and vertical. There was a very, very bureaucratic structure. The regional government was very, very bureaucratic, very ineffective. It wasn't corrupt, it was just very inefficient because everything was very vertically organized. And they used to recruit bright young graduates to work there, and they would always leave after about a year. They got bored. They had nothing interesting to do. They were given very narrow tasks, and they would leave and they would go and work for the private sector. This changed when they had a deputy governor who understood this point about horizontal coordination. And what he did, he insisted that his managers allowed staff to work in project groups across the structure, that they would form project teams and they'd be allowed to spend a day a week working on cross-cutting problems, which had a strategic importance. And this could only be done through the enforcement of that deputy governor's authority. He told them, said, you have to allow these people to do this. And that he used his vertical authority to make it possible for people to work across the structure horizontally. And what people told me was that they actually enjoyed working there. The younger people they would stay longer. They wouldn't leave because they were actually doing useful work at an earlier stage. They felt they were achieving something. Another interesting point, that one of the older staff there told me that this is how it used to be done in the old days, but the new people didn't realize that. The new people were more rigid in their approach to bureaucracy. In the past, bureaucracies had been more informal. Those who had been there for many years knew how to do things in a more informal way. Right. I think I've mentioned this earlier. I've just said collaboration and cooperation. Cooperation can often be short term. It's often it's based on subordination. You will cooperate with the your superior. You cooperate with the headquarters. It's a kind of, you do it, but it's not done because you're particularly committed. With collaboration, it implies a more committed form of joint working. I think, yes, proves professional complementarity. And a key point is trust. Collaboration works on trust. If you don't trust people you're collaborating with, your collaboration doesn't last very long, because it costs you time if you're always having to check what the other people are doing, then you might as well just work in a traditional administrative style. It'd be more effective. So basic collaboration is where if you have trust, you can actually, you can in a sense economize, you can spend less resources on administration, you can work outside of the traditional administrative structure because you have trust. Remember, lots of the structures we have are there for an absence of trust. You know, you have structures of people checking and looking for, you know, because you know, governments do not work on trust generally. They work on rules which are there, which are enforced. So if you're able to collaborate with trust, that actually saves you a lot of trouble. You can actually, you don't need to worry. I mean, an example I would give you is that when you trust somebody, you don't need to check all their work. If you don't trust someone, you have to check everything they do. So there's a big efficiency advantage from collaboration if the trust is there, if they can trust each other. Right. Yeah, I think I'll have to speed up because I've probably taken too long. Just very quickly on this, one interesting area is inter-organization policy implementation. Yes, I think a key point is that much policy implementation is inter-organizational. Now, there are a few policies which are just implemented just by one organization. For example, yes, schools, Ministry of Education, even in schools, you still have different levels of government involved in implementation. So they're very, if you take in different levels, you know, local government, regional government, and provincial, and so on. In fact, most policy implementation is inter-organizational. It involves relationship between different organizations, and that really, I think, raises the basis of what is the basis for collaboration between them. And one could be authority. I would say it's more like cooperation than collaboration. You know, authority. If the authority demands it, then you cooperate. Or it could be common interest, that you share the goal. You have goal congruence. Your goals and the goals of the policy are the same or close together. Therefore, you will collaborate. Or it can be exchange, quid pro quo, that you will get something in exchange for this. I think particularly when you think of centre local implementation, you know, local authorities may be given something in order to implement a policy. And so they will collaborate because there's some kind of exchange involved. If you know the old Etzioni idea that there are three ways of getting compliance, it's a very similar idea. So there's coercion, there's commercial, you know, where you pay people to get to comply, and there's commitment. And the point made, of course, is that commitment is very it is very cheap. It doesn't, you know, if you're coercing someone, you have to spend a lot of resources checking on them. If people are only doing what they're told because they have no, they're being coerced, that they have no alternative, then you have to check. You have to keep checking on them and so on. Commercial is a problem because you pay people to do things, and then gradually that money that you're paying becomes less valuable. You have to pay more. Commitment. If someone's committed, they don't need to be supervised. You know, they or not so much. They share. You know that they share. They're committed to the same goals. The example that Etzioni gives is that religious organizations tend to be quite light on administration because the people involved, they are committed to their cause. So what he's saying is commitment is a very cost-effective model. If you can achieve trust and commitment, then it is quite cost-effective. And it's important to say that because I think most of us, we probably think coercion, in the short term, coercion is the most effective. If people are made to do something, you know, if you say, you know, you're directed to do this, but otherwise you will lose your budget. Yes, in the short term, that is effective. In the long term, much less so. It means you always have to keep coercing. If you stop coercing, then people will stop doing the work. So commitment in the longer term is much more effective. Right. Yeah, the point here, I'll just summarize very quickly. This Vangen and Huxham, very good writers on this area of collaborative governance. I think what they're saying is that there was a lot of idealism around collaboration in the late 90s, early 2000s. People thought it was a new form of government that would be non-hierarchical and partnership-based. And I think what studies then began to look into it in more detail. They said what often happens is, collaboration still involves power. And quite often, when you have a partnership or a collaboration, there's usually one stronger party involved. For example, in the UK, a lot of the partnerships, ultimately, either government or local government was the key player. A lot of the other stakeholders, in the end, they were really, and it was a form of getting them involved in what the government actually wanted them to do. And so I think what you begin to add, yes, collaborative government, it still involves power, it still involves influence. Don't assume that because people are collaborating, therefore there are no power relations. I was with the colleagues, I spent some years we worked with the city of Ekaterinburg in Russia. And this is but many years ago now, before the current changes. And the interesting point there was that it was quite a top-down system. And their model of strategy was to have a small team would write a strategy and basically it would be adopted. And through our rather complicated story, we managed to convince them not to do that. And instead, they put together a large number of stakeholders. So literally hundreds of people were brought into the process of developing the strategy. So it became a genuine collaborative event. It still had the mayor's authority. You still had the mayor authority behind it, but it had a lot of support from stakeholders, academic, business, social, and so on. And the key point about it was, because they did that, the strategy remained in place, and that council that they set up, this kind of partnership council, for another 15 years, literally 15 years after that, they were still starting from that strategic plan and that structure of cooperation. So it can be very effective. Why am I saying? I think because at first it looked like the efficient way to do it is just give 2 or 3 people a chance, write a strategy document, get it done quickly. But in the long term, it's far more effective to have a lot more people involved. As long as you had the authority behind it, as long as the mayor, a strong mayor, was pushing it, that larger stakeholder involvement was more effective. I will skip the next example. It's basically just to how collaboration between departments was developed in a very bureaucratic coal mining organization. And I think the interesting thing, I was observing this when it happened, the interesting thing was that you still had conflict in the system, but now the conflict was between levels, which was less damaging. So you had middle management now uniting to disagree with senior management on the different tasks they were doing. But that was actually less damaging than when you had the vertical departments disagreeing, because at least the work was brought together at that middle level. Vertical horizontal integration. Horizontal, so I think it's quite useful. There's a United Nations document about coping with the COVID pandemic, which is well worth reading. They come up to very clear definitions of vertical and horizontal integration. Horizontal integration means how far can government departments on different issues, how can they actually work with each other? Whereas vertical integration is how can central and local and provincial government collaborate with each other. And I think the view they took was that horizontal integration was critical. Where there was weakness in horizontal coordination, horizontal integration in government, this led to to worse outcomes in the pandemic than otherwise. Another piece of work I've been involved with is environmental policy integration, in which we looked at how there were 2 ways to if you want to make the environment a key policy issue, there are two ways of doing it. You can either have a ministry, which is the environment ministry, which tries to influence the others. That's kind of the vertical approach. You have a vertical ministry, then tries to influence other ministries. Or you have a horizontal cross-cutting committee above the ministries. And that was actually more effective. That coordinated the work across. It involves the people from the ministries in that committee. So they gradually, it might go slower at first, but it has you're more likely to get the change implemented because they're involved in that committee. All the ministries are in there. They gradually are involved, and they will implement the policy. Right. I think because of time, I will. There's a whole case here about the UK Captain's Office. You can read it. I think I won't go through it. It's really about how one of the problems of collaboration is that in many governments, there's a fear of having too strong a central body. There needs to be a kind of coordinating center which brings parts of government together. But in many countries, ours included, there is this kind of people are not too. They don't really want to create a very powerful center. They would rather there's some kind of pluralism at the center, different central bodies, but not just one coordinated. And this has been for many years. This has been different prime ministers, different ministers have tried to create this. It's never quite happened, but I won't. I think I'll move forward. Just there's some interesting quotes here about how difficult it is to actually get things done in government. People assume the government, the government is a machine. It's actually quite difficult to get anything, to get things going through government because there are so many different interests involved. And this is why corporate management leadership is important. Leadership is to try and create a sense of shared goals. So I will move on past this. Just in passing, the vaccine. If I UK at the moment, the government is rather chaotic. So, but in the pandemic, we did have one success story, which was the vaccines, and it's interesting. The vaccine task force was a successful example of exactly what we're talking about. It was a collaboration between civil servants from different ministries, people from industry, people from the pharmaceutical industry, different contractors, medical contractors. It involved the local doctors, the networks of local doctors. And so it had a very good combination of depth of expertise and also a broad network for implementation. And actually run very. I think it was at the time. I think it was the quickest, most effective vaccination in terms of approving and implementing the vaccine. So it is possible. In other areas, the government did not work so effectively, but at that particular one, yes, it was. And it started as a joint unit set up by two ministries, which then brought together different stakeholders. So right from the beginning, it was a collaborative venture with strong, drawing effectively on different skills, different partners. Right. I just said this is a rather pessimistic view about how. Normativity. This is a view that. In government, you need to have meanings and ideas. That the government as a system needs to have ideas to make it work. Otherwise, if you don't have unifying ideas or kind of system which draws different ideas together, then the machinery of government will just go. It will become chaotic because everyone will just pursue their own departmental interests. This is to show you how this has become part of the culture. This is a website actually giving advice on people applying for the civil service on how if you get asked a question about working together, because for some years now, our public services, what they will say is they say what they really need is people who can work together with others, people who can work with people who have a different professional background, people who can work with people from different departments. This is the skill is actually quite difficult to sign. And here they've actually written out a 250-word statement in which the person said, this is the kind of thing that you should say, how you were able to put together a team, how you were able to draw on people's different skills, how you were able to network with other departments and so on, how you were able to put different types of information together and so on. So to show that you have the capacity to work together. This is what the civil service are now looking for, someone who can do that kind of working together. I just thought I'd mention here this in different ways. Birmingham had many excellent students from Indonesia, including several PhDs, and there's just three who are relevant to this topic. One, Denny Junianto, looked at the integration between different government performance management systems. And I think he came to the conclusion, I think he started thinking, why were they not integrated? And then I think he came to the conclusion that within government, it was decided it was better to keep these separate, that if you put it all together in one, it would be too powerful a performance system. It was better that different parts of government had their own ways of doing things, as long as they did not actually contradict each other. So that, again, it's a bit like our cabinet office, the idea that things are perhaps best done if there's a certain level of integration, but not complete integration. Yogi Sawano looked at policy integration in forestry, looking how different agencies of the state and different non-state agencies, how they collaborated around the forestry system, how far that policy integration worked, policy integration across different government departments. And one of our current PhD student, Krishna Rakhmayanti, is looking specifically at collaborative governance and how in disasters you get collaboration between, you have to have sudden collaboration between local authorities, non-government organizations, central government, and so on, and how does that actually work when you have an emergency and things have to be done quickly? How does that collaborate? What are the forms of collaboration that take? Because clearly those events require collaboration. They can't. No one agency can just do what it wants in that situation. There has to be collaboration, and I think it's what's the level of collaboration that is there. So, and in the end, I said the common element across these is the balance between vertical and horizontal elements. That in effective government, you need to have a vertical element, traditional administration, and you also need to have collaboration and partnership horizontally across the structure. And finally, I started with talking about the Tower of Babel and how that sort of seemed to symbolize the problems of a traditional organization. And I was interested to read, and in a number of places I read this, that Jakarta and Jogja, which is near where you are situated, some people have actually seen that building, that complex of buildings, as almost as a form of government. It shows the sort of harmony, it's not all sameness around one point. There are completely different parts of the complex, and they're connected by bridges. And in a sense, by recognizing different functions and different values and so on in the structure, the whole actually works harmoniously through the recognition of different interests. So it's quite an unusual structure. It doesn't try to push everything into one clear design. It has lots of different sides to it. And this in some way, this might be seen to be perhaps the answer for how government should work, that you don't try to make everything the same. You recognize differences, but you try to get those differences working within the same overall context. So they can think and do different things, but they're doing it in a way which pursues the common good overall. And I think on that, I've just put some references there. Thank you for your attention. I'm sorry, I've talked rather longer than was intended.
No, thank you very much, Dr. Campbell, for the very lecture on this. And yeah, we got many new insights, yeah, and also explanations on many things that is related mostly on the collaboration and partnership. Yeah, that's very interesting. And if you don't mind, I would like to translate some of your points in the Indonesian language. Is it okay?
Okay, certainly, yes.
So, because I also invite the audience to ask questions in the Indonesian language also. So there is no need for them to speak in English. So they might be shy or whatever. Okay, so I will translate a little bit of your lecture. Jadi ini tadi Dr. Campbell sudah memberikan pembahasan ya mengenai apa itu kaitan antara collaboration dan partnership. Bahwa collaboration itu lebih pada bekerja bersama ya untuk membentuk bekerja bersama dari berbagai aspek organisasi atau dari berbagai organisasi. Kemudian partnership itu berarti sesuatu yang lebih dekat begitu ya. Jadi yang bersifat lebih permanen dibandingkan dengan collaboration ya. Dan di sini collaboration dan partnership itu merupakan dianggap sebagai solusi terhadap administrasi publik, khususnya terkait organisasi, problem organisasi ya. Dan ini mulai muncul pada abad ke-19 ketika era organisasi-organisasi itu berkembang menjadi lebih besar, ya bigger organization, larger organization, sehingga kemudian muncul differentiation, ya pembagian kerja, kemudian ada division of labor, pembagian kerja tadi, kemudian ada different skills, ya skill yang berbeda-beda, kemudian ada specialization, dan kemudian muncullah fragmentation, ya organisasi terpecah-pecah ke dalam beberapa room gitu ya. Dan ini merupakan fundamental problem of organization ya. Jadi yang diusulkan adalah should be better coordination ya. Better coordination, more common languages ya. Kemudian better communication ya, karena kadang-kadang itu masing-masing bagian dari organisasi itu kemudian mengejar tujuannya sendiri-sendiri ya. They use different language ya, to interact to each other, sehingga ketika ada different actors ya, aktor yang berbeda-beda, badan yang berbeda-beda, mereka bekerja bersama, dan ini kemudian terjadi kesalahan-kesalahan ya, terjadi masalah pada organisasi-organisasi yang lebih besar karena koordinasi kemudian menjadi sulit. Nah, kemudian pada awal tahun 2000, collaboration dan partnership itu menjadi lebih populer karena dari paradigma yang bersifat hierarki kemudian lebih ke bersifat network atau jaringan. Ya, karena apa? Karena ini lebih baik gitu ya dibandingkan sesuatu yang bersifat hierarkial dan mendatangkan banyak masalah gitu. Nah, tetapi masalahnya juga kadang-kadang untuk collaboration ini membutuhkan lebih banyak waktu, begitu ya, lebih time consuming gitu ya. Nah, tetapi ini sesuatu yang menarik gitu ya untuk didiskusikan, sehingga ini kenapa kita kembali apa sih sebetulnya collaboration dan partnership, apakah ini memang bermanfaat? Gitu ya, betul untuk mengatasi masalah dalam administrasi publik gitu ya. Jadi kaitannya juga dengan birokrasi karena birokrasi itu dianggap sebagai sesuatu yang organisasi dengan birokrasinya itu menjadi lamban bergerak gitu ya. Kemudian dikatakan bahwa birokrasi doesn't work, birokrasi itu tidak berfungsi ya, sehingga menjadi berbahaya. Ya, menjadi berbahaya karena kemudian karena terlalu besarnya ya unsur yang ada di dalamnya, sehingga secara kualitas itu juga kemudian menjadi menurun karena menjadi lebih rumit begitu. Nah, sehingga administrasi publik itu kemudian menjadi membingungkan gitu ya, karena orang bekerja di dalam birokrasi. Birokrasi dibutuhkan, ya, tetapi birokrasi juga banyak sekali dikritik sehingga muncullah Anti-Bureaucracy, ya, gerakan-gerakan untuk anti-bureaucracy inilah yang kemudian dikenal sebagai agile government, ya, jadi agile bureaucracy, yang birokrasi yang lebih lincah, yang lebih bisa beradaptasi begitu terhadap perkembangan situasi, sehingga orang juga menjadi lebih mudah bekerja sama dan manajer-manajer dalam pekerjaan juga menjadi lebih dipermudah. Nah, kemudian ya hal-hal ini terkait juga selain formulasi kebijakan juga di dalam implementasi kebijakan. Nah, tadi dikatakan bahwa dalam implementasi kebijakan itu the government doesn't work, ya. Pemerintah itu kayaknya kerjanya nggak bagus gitu ya, sehingga harusnya ini di-cut ya, dipotong begitu ya beberapa steps ya, proses ya, step atau langkah di dalam proses. Dan kemudian muncullah isu mengenai vertical differentiation ya, struktur yang vertikal, kemudian horizontal integration ya, integrasi yang bersifat horizontal ya di dalam struktur organisasi. Jadi mana yang lebih baik itu. Nah, collaboration dan partnership ini merupakan solusi sebagai respons terhadap administrasi publik yang lebih balance gitu ya. Tidak menggantikan administrasi publik, tetapi menjadikan administrasi publik itu menjadi lebih balance. Ya, jadi ada juga isu yang terkait horizontalism ya, bahwa power itu sekarang di flatten itu menjadi lebih datar gitu ya karena adanya teknologi. Tapi ini Pak Dr. Campbell tidak sepenuhnya setuju dengan itu bahwa power itu flatten ya, karena sebetulnya birokrasi masih punya power. Dan terkait dengan collaborative dan cooperation, kembali bahwa collaborative itu bersifat joint working dan kemudian didasarkan pada complementary dan trust. Ya, cooperation lebih bersifat short term. Nah, kemudian tadi diberikan beberapa contoh kaitan antara power dengan collaborative governance. Jadi ada beberapa kasus tadi yang disampaikan, misalnya tentang task force untuk vaksin ya, untuk kaitannya dengan pandemi, ini merupakan success story di Inggris karena ada different skill dan kompetensi yang kemudian disatukan dan mereka work together, dan ini adalah sesuatu yang lebih bagus begitu. Baik, itu yang bisa saya simpulkan, kurang lebihnya mungkin ada yang masih kurang, tapi ini inti tadi yang sudah disampaikan oleh Dr. Campbell. Baik, kalau begitu we invite the audience to give questions or to say whatever to discuss this event. Okay, Muhammad Hamam, ya Pak Hamam. Okay, thank you very much Pak Hamam. Yeah. Silakan bisa dalam dua bahasa. Ya. Yeah.
Hello Adrian, how are you? So nice to meet you.
Very nice to see you again, Mohammed. Mohammed was one of my best students on the MPA some years ago.
Thank you very much, Adrian.
Yeah. That's good.
Okay. Adrian, I listened to your lecture. You did not touch much about public-private partnership. I want to know your view whether, especially in public audit, how much should public audit go into public-private partnership, especially when the funding is from private side, from the private side. How your view about that?
A public-private partnership in public audit.
Pardon me?
You say, how far should public audit be?
Yes,
subject
right.
to public-private.
How far should public audit go into public-private partnership?
Yeah, I tend to go for a kind of compromise on most things. I think I think it's always good to have a more than one interest involved. So yes, I think up to a point to open to public audit to have some private involvement, yes, but not to hand it over completely. Because I think, it depends what's meant by public-private. People, this term public-private partnership is widely used, but people often mean very different things. So some people, public-private partnership means you just hand over something to a private partner. I would be hesitant on something like that. I think a plural structure is good, where you have some involvement. So some aspects would be private. I think that would be best. So I would say a compromise. Then I think you can get the benefit of both.
Because when we see like a large project, when the funding from the public sector is not enough, then the government decided to create some public-private partnership where the private side will be the will find the funding for that project. We tend to confuse because the money is not from the public sector, the money is from the private sector. That's why I asked, is it still in public sector? Because the successness of that project, it will affect for the government. It is important for the government that that project is succeed. That's why I think I agree with you that in terms of public audit, we should not just give the government job to the private. The government should still have responsibility in that task. Thank you for the answer, Adrian.
I would just add to that because I mean, public actors and private actors have interests. Private want to make a profit, public want to keep their jobs or protect their position. So it's good to dilute those interests with the other interests. So I think that's the good move, but not to transfer. Not to transfer entirely. So that. We had public-private partnership was very popular in the UK around about 15 years ago. And then I mean, you still have it, obviously, but there isn't quite the same enthusiasm. I think because people realize that, to get the private sector involved, you often had to make it work. You had to give them incentives. And those incentives often were long-term incentives, or quite large. And so it might have been effective in the short term. In the long term, it was perhaps not so effective. So there's more skepticism about it now than there was at the time. It seemed a very good idea.
You are correct. In Indonesia, I see some project. I believe it is currently a popular choice. So that's why I asked. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Pak Hamam. Yes, that's a very good questions. Thank you very much. Yeah, how far that the cooperation between the public and private could intervene then into the government policies, because if the funding comes from the private sector, so there must be dependency of the government sector to the private sector, and that's not good if it involves or it's related to the public interest. Yeah, because as you see that the private has its own interest and the government has the public interest. But if the private sector enters or intervene too much, then the public interest, which has to be prepared or given by the government, is in big questions, right? Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Yeah. Mungkin ada pertanyaan yang lainnya lagi? Bentar, ini saya lihat di chat. Di chat itu. Oh, okay. So I will read a question from Rifka Nafilatuna Fihah. Yeah. Good afternoon, Mr. Campbell. I'm Rifka. Let me ask you, I see a social reality in Indonesia that either elite or privileged people can gain easier access to collaboration in the process of creating public policy, Well, small people have limited access to it. It will dangerous for small people and the massive welfare. So how can the collaborative process of public policy be fairly accessible and the inequality of opportunities between the elite and the small number of people can be removed? Thank you. That's a very good question, Rifka. Thank you very much.
That is a very good question. Yes, I think what you're describing is that when people are saying collaboration is good, and people have talked about governance through kind of policy circles and so on, there's a problem with that, which is you often get what you might call policy capture, that the policy making is captured by interest groups who are, yes, as you say, more powerful or privileged or whatever. And I think I don't think there's an easy answer to that. I think that's one of the reasons why one should be, the enthusiasm for collaboration needs to always keep some realism, that when you collaborate, remember that the people who are collaborating may be quite powerful in themselves. This is why we have, in fact, this is partly why we have a civil service. This is why we have political parties, is to prevent a few powerful people having too much influence on the policy process. So yes, there's a danger that in becoming more collaborative, we take a step back and we allow people to influence the policy process. In terms of, I think probably it is quite difficult to do that. I think you have to basically you have to make an effort to see that that when you are inviting people to collaborate, you're always trying to bring in more different groups. I think it's just through that. At a local level, that is easier done than at national level. At local level, you can, if you want, you can go out and find citizens, you can draw people into the policy process. However, I mean, to be realistic, it's not always possible to keep people interested. The people who are interested tend to be those who are more powerful, and they will keep trying to collaborate. It's not always easy to balance that with other people. So I think this is an argument for keeping the civil service relatively strong. As I was saying in my talk, too often people want to say, let's take the bureaucracy away, let's just have collaboration and so on. If you do that, you will have very big power imbalances, as some people have more access than others. Therefore, yes, this is an argument for having a balance between a collaboration and should we say, a traditional civil service. You need to that the state shouldn't become too dependent on powerful actors outside. I'm always reminded of, you go back to the original, why did the Chinese in empire, why did they invent the kind of civil service idea? Because the civil service was what protects the state from influence of powerful families. And I think that's true in every country to some extent. The civil service is there to see to it that no interest group can be too powerful. So when we extend collaboration, we have to remember that.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah, that's good. This balance between the small number of people and between the elite and the common people is very much relevant to the discussions of the policy process, right? Because that's the reality, and we know many models of policy formulation and policy implementations, and this usually always concern on power. Yeah, and as we know that public policy and politics is something that is not that's impossible to be separated, right? Yeah. Oke, thank you very much untuk Mbak Rifka. Mungkin ada lagi yang akan bertanya? Tidak ada. Bu Hana mungkin mau bertanya, Bu Hana, atau share ideas? Buana sudah nggak ada ini. Oh yeah, Dr. Campbell, we have some meetings at the same time this afternoon. So people are kind of people are separated in some activities. Yeah, but I'm glad that still more than 70 people are in this meeting. And as I have notes from the committee that this event, which should be ended in 14:20, so now we have come to now time is 14:34, and I think that is enough for us. And Dr. Campbell, thank you very much for your share. It's very much enlightening, and hopefully that you are agreed to join us again in the near future and give your lectures on other topics that I'm sure that will be very interesting for us all. And so untuk MC, waktu saya kembalikan. Thank you very much. Untuk terima kasih juga. Ya, thank you very much. Ya, terima kasih juga untuk audience ya yang sudah bersama kami dan sudah memberikan banyak pertanyaan. Ya, terima kasih. Oke. Amelia, thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Hertuti Purnaweni as the moderator and Dr. Adrian Campbell as the speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, please turn on your camera because we are going to have a photo session. I will wait for you around 10 seconds. Thank you. Okay, I will count 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Thank you. And we would like to remind you to fill the presence form link in the chat box. Make sure you already fill it because it is so important for the certificate. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we now come to the end of the visiting lecture of public administration. Please stay healthy and stay safe so we could meet in another occasions with joy and more blessings. Once again, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Oh, Dr. Campbell, sorry. There is a question from one of the audience that is it possible for you to share the materials to us?
Of course, yes, yes,
okay.
I will. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much because they are very interested in this and they can read more if you would like to give the PPT. Would you like to share it now since they are still here?
I can send it to, shall I email it or?
Oh, okay. Is it too big if you send it through the chat? Yeah.
Oh, I see. Sorry. Yes, of course. Just a moment. I'm having trouble getting.
Maybe it's too big. I don't know.
I think I'm having difficulty with that. I may have to send it as an email if that's.
Okay.
If that's...
Okay. 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 Then I will announce to the audience. Okay. Untuk audience, PPT akan dikirimkan oleh Dr. Campbell, and so we are going to distribute the PPT from Dr. Campbell's once we have received that. Okay. Thank you very much again, Dr. Campbell.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Dr. Campbell. See you soon.
Thank you, Adrian. See
you.
you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Pak Hamam reuni ya dengan dosennya ya. Alhamdulillah.
Thank you, Bu Tuti. Luar biasa.
Ya, terima kasih banyak, Bu Rina.
Sama nih,